For a long part of 20th century, Brazilians lived in a delusion of a racial democracy, belief that multiple races coexist without racism, conflict or discrimination. Sounds similar, huh? Like the Indian secular democracy, unity in diversity, and India where some live in the bubbles of caste privilege. In this bubble here, I'll take my specs off. Whoa, I can see right there that nervous upper caste dude. Now I wear my expensive fancy black goggles and I am in a different universe. I'm like caste blind, but I can see everything. The camera, the audience, the angry troll, but not my fucking caste privilege. Ooh. Back to the glasses then. Now I can see better. Even in the 21st century, many Brazilians are still living in denial and delusion. In a poll conducted for the book named Not Black, Not White, quite the contrary, 97% said they are not racist, while 98% also claimed to know a racist person. Irony at its best, or the worst. In India as well, this 21st century has become one of the excuses for anti-reservation propaganda. Oh, we are modern now. There is no casteism. Remove reservation. We are casteless. Okay, hold it there. After demonetization, all of us are only cashless. Please, no Indian is a casteist. Sahi baat hai. Only thing, bro, I'll marry in my caste. I'll not study myself and all my life just blame reservation. In 21st century now, the Latin American nation, Brazil, is finally getting over its delusion after it started its reservation program for people of color at the start of this century. Now, Brazil might be known in India for like football, coffee, and samba. Almost like India's Bharati dancer. Shava. Its reservation policy also presents a unique picture. Now, India has the oldest reservation program in the world. Brazil has the youngest. This episode is like shaping up to be the clash of generations. Brazil's reservation policies are also in education and jobs. We'll also discuss the new controversial monitoring mechanisms in Brazil and try to learn from the youngest. Like reservation in India is based on caste, because of the caste system, Brazil has these policies for people of color, as it also has a long history of racism and racial discrimination. When Brazil was under Portuguese colonial rule from the 16th to the 19th century, over 5 million slaves were brought there, the largest in any country of the world. Even after its independence in 1822, Brazil was the last country in the world to abolish slavery in 1888. Then from 1960s to 1980s, Brazil was under military dictatorship. A civilian government finally came back to power in Brazil only in 1985. The reservation policies yet took another 15 years to start. The football players might be really fast, but Brazil is a slow poke. Who am I to judge them? We Indians are the tortoise of the world. We in the real world even lose to rabbits. After 1985 in Brazil, things started to change, albeit slowly. 1990s was the time when the black movement was at its peak, especially in education. Advocacy organizations like the Vestibular Prep Movement for Blacks and the Poor and Educa Fro prepared poor students of color for competitive examinations. Since then, there has been a growing assertion of pride and identity among Brazil's blacks and people of color, which reflected in the Brazil's 2010 census, when for the first time people of color became the majority, 51% of population, while proportion of whites was found to be 47%. Intellectuals always keep harping about majoritarian rule. It's actually been so much of the rule of minority. Oh, yeah. Intellectuals are also part of the privileged minority. Now we'll watch young Brazilians of color asserting themselves.
Marching with friends and classmates, Lais Nascimento is not only demanding better education and healthcare, she's also demanding equality.
Even though people say we have no racism in Brazil, it's not true. We are the majority of the population, but we don't have economic or political power.
Like most people in the state of Salvador, Lais is Afro-Brazilian. But unlike many of her fellow protesters, she didn't grow up in a middle-class family. She lives in a poor neighborhood on the outskirts of the city and is the first person in her family to ever go to university.
Brazil is one of the most socially unequal countries in the world. We're selling the image that everything is good and will host a World Cup, but it's a country that denies opportunity to its own people.
But for young leaders like Lais and her generation, that may be changing. And now they are seizing the opportunity to make their voices heard.
The representation of blacks and colored in the top levels of Brazilian society is quite grim, to say the least. They are less than 10% of columnists in top newspapers. Only around 15% are in Brazil's judiciary. In India, however, it's even worse. No SC/ST judge has been elevated to the Supreme Court since 2010, nor any current Chief Justice of High Court is from the SC/ST community. And we all know what happened with Justice Karnan in the Supreme Court. Various studies in Brazil show that 2/3 of poor in Brazil are people of color. Colored people with same qualifications have half earnings as compared to whites. Things are the worst for a black woman as they earn only a quarter of the salary paid to a white male. In India as well, there is a huge gap between monthly household expenditures of SC/ST, OBC communities and the upper caste. We look at monthly household expenditures as in India, there is no direct survey of incomes. The money for survey spent on government's publicity or just evaporated. You see these huge big boards everywhere you go with superhero acts of Modi and Kejriwal. And I'm like, यार जिंदगी की वाट लग रही है, ये हम पर हंस रहे हैं. In the corporate and business sector of Brazil now, the number of colored people decreases as one goes higher in the company hierarchy. Only 5% are in board of directors. The worst is Brazil's cabinet. The famous football player Pele became the first colored man to serve as a minister in 1994. Of sports only, though it didn't generate any spark. Then Luisa Helena de Barros was the only black minister again in the cabinet of the last Brazilian government. And the current cabinet of ministers now is filled up of only white men. Brazil is not only a slow turtle then, it goes racing also in the opposite direction. ऐसे कैसे जीतेंगे भाई? Rabbit से. Shocking Indians, right? Now let's see India's cabinet composition since independence. Representation of SCs, STs has been abysmal there as well. Whoever has been ruling the nation, communal or secular. See the 70 years of these elected governments. Absolute fucking consistent, huh? Even more than Rahul Dravid. Now, according to Brazil's 2015 official statistics, 26% of white students get in universities, while less than half, that is only around 13% of black students, get in there. This is actually an improvement because of the reservation program, as in 2005, only 5.5% blacks reached university. Number has actually more than doubled in a decade. Finally now, let's discuss the actual reservation policies. They started in Brazil in only one state of Rio de Janeiro in 2001, when a law reserved 40% seats in graduation for colored students. It slowly caught up in other states, or even the universities themselves made such policies. In Brazil's private sector, the Unipalmeiras University, founded in 2003 and named after a 17th century rebel slave leader, also reserved 50% of its places for black students. Yet, no Brazilian central law was there at the start of the century. It came only in 2012 when the Brazilian parliament approved the law of social quotas that reserved 50% of seats for students of public schools in federal universities and federal technical schools. Out of this 50%, half were reserved for low-income students and the other half for blacks and mixed-race students.
27-year-old Katia Correia is finishing her bachelor's degree in languages at a federal university in Rio de Janeiro. She was fortunate to get here. The daughter of a driver and a secretary, she could not afford a private university. And despite hard work, her public school education was not enough to earn her a coveted spot in one of Brazil's prestigious public universities. Historically, those places go to wealthy white students educated privately. But thanks to a recent affirmative action law, she got her opportunity to study. Katia thinks that the problem of Brazil's racism is slowly being corrected, in part because Afro-Brazilians themselves are beginning to recognize the great injustice they have suffered. She says she only recently understood how important her African heritage is to her personal identity.
My story is not a story of slavery. My story is a story of victory, and my future depends on believing in myself and in the progress I will make in the future.
A future she's determined will include a university degree.
However, in 2005, the Brazilian government did start an affirmative action measure of its own kind called the Program of University for All. It provides full and partial scholarships and even loans to low-income students from public schools to get admissions in private colleges and institutions. These scholarships are determined by scores in a national exam, and there is also reservation for black and brown candidates, its percentage depending upon their population in a state. For participating in this scheme, private institutions get tax credits, which is actually one of the criticisms of the program as well. The others being lower quality of private institutions, government's lack of focus on public higher education. So in Brazil as well, public education is bad at the school level and best at the college level. And private has quality at the school level, but not at the higher level. Totally India-like. The quota policies were challenged in the court in Brazil as well. Again, on the same shit, get it economic factors inside it. Like the Brazilian Supreme Court approved both the 2012 law and the scholarship program, stating that reservation policies can take a person's race into account. According to an interesting analysis, 90% of Brazil's public universities use a mix of racial and socio-economic criteria. Only 4 universities in Brazil apply purely racial criteria. The laws in Brazil are already a mix of race and class. India also has the concept of creamy layer in quotas. So this crying on economic and class should now be called the global obsession, more than Trump's obsession with North Korea or Modi's love, well, with himself, or our curiosity of the British royal wedding. The results of policies are out there for everyone to see. As I already told you, enrollment of blacks and brown have increased. Also, there are no problems with the performance of quota beneficiaries. According to an article in The Economist, research tells us that even in a highly competitive course like medicine at one of the most premier universities, University of Brasilia, entrance grades were similar for quota and non-quota beneficiaries. Even when they were not, they became similar by the end of graduation. In fact, it was found that quota beneficiaries worked harder, skipped fewer classes, and were less likely to drop out. Because for them, it's not Bapu ki Khairata. We Indians should have celebrated like Tina Dabi, a Dalit topping the IAS exam. But what does she get? Trolling by self-entitled shitheads. Moving to reservation in employment policies of Brazil. Along with the black movement in the 1990s, international events at the start of the century also gave thrust to these policies. After signing the Durban Declaration in the 2001 United Nations World Conference against racism, the first legal order for establishing 20% quota was passed by the Brazil's Ministry of Colonization and Agrarian Reform. Various other ministries followed it, but still overall there was no reservation in government or private jobs. Finally, in 2014, the Brazilian government woke up and reserved 20% of its positions for blacks and mixed race, unfortunately quite less than the 50% in educational institutions. The most important aspect now, the monitoring mechanisms, and the most controversial aspect of Brazil's policies as well. Since 2016, race tribunals have been introduced to decide the color of skin of applicants to government jobs, and these are also in universities now. This was done after a lot of reports of fraud in quota policies emerged. Earlier, however, no such committees or tribunals were there, as this was considered to be a racist act. The quota beneficiaries self-identified their color, but many a times it was alleged that those with lighter skin faked themselves in the mixed race category to get in. The thing in Brazil is that unlike other countries where people are strictly divided into black and white, in Brazil a lot of interrace marriages took place and a lot of people actually identified themselves in various skin shades, and there comes the term mixed race. So skin color determines race in Brazil, not the ancestry of the person. What has particularly agitated mixed race people is that there are guidelines on how to measure lip size, hair texture, and nose width. And there are no mixed race people in tribunals. Well, a race tribunal hearing be like something like, "Come on in, this is a race tribunal. I am white, but I'll check your color. Come here. Lip size, good kisser. Hair texture, nice shampoo. Nose width, whoa, he's lying. He's Pinocchio." Those opposing these tribunals say that they are not following proper scientific parameters to identify the color of a beneficiary. On the other hand, those who are pro these tribunals believe it will help combat fraud in quota policies. Whites should not be able to take advantage. One thing absolutely clear from this controversy is what Helios Santos, a leading figure in the Black Rights Movement, said: "Civil rights efforts that don't come with any oversight are a joke." So basically, we Indians have been living with a joke of reservation policy. The oldest reservation policies in the world have never had monitoring mechanisms to check fraud in quotas. That was Brazil and reservation, and an end to our 4-part series. America, South Africa, Malaysia, Brazil that we looked at, except India, these are the 4 countries that have the biggest and controversial reservation and affirmative action policies. However, not just these 4 countries. Reservation policies are now in Bulgaria, China, France, Sri Lanka, Nigeria, and almost 1/4 of the countries in the world. 1/4. We learned from reservation policies of these countries what all we can do for reservation representation and diversity in India. Let's embrace them. If you would like to read a detailed cover story on this, do check out the link in description. Do share the video. Subscribe to our channel if you want to see more such videos. Have fun and click the bell button.